Hello everybody and welcome back. So we're going to look at a small module today, something kind of a little bit on the side. It's not one of the big main ones like the nodes, parameters, and that type of stuff like working with geometry, but it honestly is one of the most fun modules to kind of play around with and is actually vital when we're wanting to do any sort of pipeline development, because basically your user, whoever is using the tool, not necessarily you who's designing it, is going to need to be able to interact with the tool. In other words, some sort of input. Basically, when we're designing scripts, we sometimes say, okay, I'm going to build this script to accomplish a certain effect or do something, for the user, but I need to ask them certain questions. It's not always apparent to me just based on how the scene is set up, but maybe the user needs to be able to actually input some kind of command. So this whole module called the who.ui module is designed all around that. So it basically is a module that includes everything to do with interacting with Houdini itself, like as in literally when we've got this Houdini window open and we're looking at it as a user, what is happening, or how do we control these things, right? And this is why I say it's one of the most fun modules to play around with, because honestly, like when you're trying to get used to scripting or whatever, just playing in this module is so much fun. You can, I don't know, maybe it's just me, but I get so much joy from like being able to, maybe pop open an extra window, or maybe close this help tab over here and swap this window with this one, just through code. It's a lot of fun to play with because you see immediate results, but also at the same time it actually gets you to play with different classes, methods, and sub functions and things like that within Python and Houdini. So I would encourage you to actually play with this one, particularly if you find it as fun as me, just because it gets you to kind of get used to using the sort of the classes that get returned by particular functions, and how you can sort of go from one function to another, which is a method of another class, which then leads you to a method of another class, and so on. So for example, let's just take this the panes. So this whole heading here, the pane layout, this is all to do with these actual window panes that we have open, right? There are other parts to this who.ui module, and those we'll get to just now. But let's just start with this first one, because this is the one that's kind of fun to play with. Now, when it talks about desktops, we're talking about these actual, the drop-down sort of saved layout of all of your window panes. But let's, and you've got your radial menus here as well, which is also fun to play with. But let's take a look at this one, panes, right? So just actually altering these windows in our scene. So, for example, we can return a list of the window panes, right? Now, I want to show you this, not that I necessarily always use this, it's very rare that you do build a script that actually interacts with these window panes, but sometimes you will. And when you do, it can be a bit confusing because you're not really sure how Houdini works with these. So examining the script and the way that the classes interact with one another helps you actually learn a little bit more about how Houdini is structured. So, for example, when we run the who.ui.panes function, you'll actually see what it returns is maybe not what we would expect, because when I first came across this function, I thought, okay, what it's going to do is have a list of, okay, I've got a Python shell open, I've got parameters, a geometry spreadsheet, a render view, so I've got all of these window panes, okay? And that is not the case. These are in fact actually these whole big panes. For example, here, this is divided top and bottom, but this is one pane that is divided into two, okay? And then this has a tab, right? And then this one also on the top has a tab, and we could add another tab, right? So we could put a scene view here. So there are multiple tabs within one window pane, and the window pane actually is then subdivided, and it's subdivided this way as well, so there's something on this side, and then these are divided this way, and so on, right? So that's what we are talking about when we talk about the actual panes, right? And so they kind of have these names that don't really mean much to us. I mean, pane 4, I'm not even sure which one that is, right? But what we can do is now it returns a list of these panes, so we can look at those individual panes and see what's inside of those. Now, this module particularly is one where I would encourage you to very much read the help file and look at what gets returned, because it's very important. Here it has returned a tuple of who.pane instances, right? So if we middle click on that, now when we go to this who.pane class, we're now going to be able to see, you know, a bunch of other functions that we can apply to these, okay? Including here, now this is quite useful, tabs. So that lets us now see that, okay, hang on, within this window pane, I can grab a list of tabs. Okay, so why don't we go through loop through this list, and for every window pane, let's print a list of tabs and see what happens there. Okay, so we'll say for p in who.ui.panes, print, then we go p, so that's our pane, dot tabs. Okay. So there we are. So now for the first pane, which was pane 4, we have one tab, which is a tree view, which I believe is this thing that's on the side over here that's sort of hidden. I don't know if you guys even know that it's there, because I often always like accidentally click on it and suddenly this thing pops up. So this is actually here by default, and you know, if we close this, then obviously that will no longer exist. Okay, so let's just hide it. Okay. Then here we have one that has a scene viewer, an IPR viewer, so that'll be our render view, and then our details view, which is a geometry spreadsheet. Okay, and here, so that must be this one at the top here. Okay, then we also have another one with a network editor, an IPR view, and a details view, so that's this at the bottom. Then we've got one that has just parameters, so that's that, and then one with a Python shell. Okay, so that's more like what we were sort of expecting. So now you'll see that under that, each one of those is a pane tab, not just a pane. Okay, and there will be certain functions that apply to the panes, and then certain functions that apply to the pane tabs, right? For example, over here we can actually split panes. So let's say we wanted to take our scene view here and actually split it. But remember, it's not the scene view actual tab. You can't split a scene view, but you can split the whole window into two, right? So we can take that one, which will be our pane 7, because you see here it's that one. So that relates to pane 7. And we can say, so we can go who.ui.panes, then we grab, actually, sorry, it's 1, which is because it's 0 and then 1, right? So that's the one we want to grab. And just to be sure, I'm going to print the tabs in it to make sure that it is the right one. Yes, it is that one. So now I'm going to say dot, and then we can say split. Let's split it horizontally. Okay. So I hit that, and now you see here it's actually split this into two. And also we can even swap them. So for example, let's say this was parameters or something, and I wanted to swap these two. Well, now I can go, so who.ui.panes, okay, and then let's grab 1 again and see whether that is still the same one, right? So yes, that is that same one, but this new one that got created is this, I believe, pane 11. So now we can say to this one, to this window, we can say dot, and then there's a split swap, I think. Yeah, split swap. So when you do that, split swap, it's then going to swap across the split line. So it's essentially doing that. When you click this button, it swaps those two. That's what it's doing. You can also minimize and maximize them. You know, there's loads of things we can do. Okay, so just have fun and go through this. I mean, you can even rotate. That's a bizarre one. So for example, these two are split horizontally. If we do a split rotate, then we can actually change it so that it's split vertically. So instead of doing a split swap here, we do a split rotate, and now suddenly those are split like that. So Not really sure when exactly you would use this, but it is actually, like I said, almost just the fact of just playing around with Houdini and seeing what you can do with it with Python is a good way of actually learning it. So go ahead and see what you can do. Yeah. So let's take a look at the tabs as well, just to see what we can do to the individual tabs. So let's go and maybe close that one. So we'll go to our over this, we'll do tabs. So we see here we have a list of these tabs, and in that tab, let's grab our scene viewer and do something to it. So 0 will then refer to our scene viewer itself. Okay. Now on that, we can apply any of these functions. For example, one thing I'd like to point out is that name, it is not exactly what you'd expect. Okay. Name is just called pane tab 1. Okay. It's not called scene view. It's just pane tab 1. You can set names, so you can actually name these tabs, right? I wonder if you can do that if you right click. Yeah, see, I don't know when you or how you can name them other than through Python. I've never come across that before until you see it in the Python thing, and it's like, okay, well, I can name these tabs, so I don't really know why that's useful to me unless I myself is then going to refer back to that tab later on. So I guess that's how you could use that, but very corner case. But here, this type is very important. So if we do type like that, then it's going to actually return a pane tab type scene viewer. Okay. So, and if we middle click here, we can see the list of who.pane tab types, right? So these will be all the different types that we have available to us. Okay. So that if we're wanting to, for example, check our scene to see whether, you know, maybe, for example, this is a really good use of it. I've always told you guys that you need to always have a Python shell open. Now, if you have a very important message to print to the Python shell, you could actually write a little partner script to go with all of your other scripts, you know, maybe some global one in your repository that would say, whenever it's going to try and print a message to the shell, first loop through all pane tabs in the entire scene to check that there is at least one Python shell and that it is not minimized. If not, then create a new one. You could maybe even create a new floating one or something like that, and then allow the printing to happen. So if I went and closed this Python shell, then clicked on the shelf tool, and it was important that it was actually printing something that I could see, but me as a user not understanding that I need that, I've just gone and closed some windows that I didn't need, click a button, suddenly a Python shell pops up with a message inside of it. Now that could be very useful, and this is how you would do it through the who.ui module. Okay, so there's lots of things we can do here to these tabs. For example, we can close them, like actually on our scene viewer tab over here, we can actually close it. So we just type close, and then over there now we don't have a scene viewer anymore. Or you can clone it, or you can make it float instead, so it's like pulling it off, or you can check its size, you can resize it, you can set the pin as well. So, you know, if you have like here these parameters that get pinned like this, so we could do that. So there's lots of cool things you can do in these. Not always going to use this every single day, but it's good to know that it's possible, and it's good to know where to find it whenever you do need it, because it can be a bit confusing. Right. But besides the kind of, you know, fun and messing around with your scene, the main thing I wanted to show you in this module, and this is the thing that is the most useful and you will use all the time with your Python scripting, is the scripted UI. Now, a much more advanced topic is kind of creating your own custom user interfaces with Python, right? So that's the PyQt type stuff, and Houdini does support PyQt, so we can build our own custom UI. But you know, that is quite confusing. It's for a much more advanced user, especially because I find there's a lot of it that's it's not the code shouldn't be confusing, but for some reason there are some little tricks or things that are very counterintuitive. So it is a much more advanced thing. So I haven't included it in the scope of this course, but we may actually cover it in a future Python course or something like that. Maybe a future TD one when we do some more advanced coding. But for now, honestly, I find that I do not like very rarely ever need PyQt because of what is available in the scripted UI here. Most of the time, this is sufficient, and it's only when you want to build really advanced, like like the R&D team, sort of real hardcore pipeline coding, that you'll then be building your own custom UI because it needs to do very specific things. Most of the time, our tools are going to just be asking the user a few questions. So it's give me a number, or give me a value, choose a node, or select a few things, or which one of these do you want, or it's things like that. Okay, choose a place, choose a file on disk, or select an attribute. You're essentially just asking the user a question and allowing them to answer it in a way that your script can then interpret it and go from there. Okay, so these are incredibly useful, and I would encourage you to actually take the time, and I really mean this because it will be very valuable to you, to take the time to go through each and every one of them and actually type it out yourself and test it, put it into practice, okay? Because you will use them, right? And they do keep adding new ones as well. Over the years since I've been using this, they've actually added a whole lot of new ones recently, or at least added them to the help file. Maybe they already existed in the code, but they've certainly updated the help file. So there are some really good ones in here. Now I'm going to go through a few with you now. We are going to go through this, but I'll skip a few that are a little less used, but I would honestly encourage you to go and try each and every one of them for several reasons. One is that we're going to use it all the time. But another is that these are actually really good examples of a function that takes a lot of arguments. Some of the arguments are specific modules in themselves, so it requires you to know that. You want to skip a lot of these arguments, so you're going to need to use the keywords. And what gets returned from the function is quite vastly different between each of these functions, and so you have to really rely on everything we've learned up to now in order to fully implement and use this UI correctly. So this is almost a very good practicing area to see if you can handle all of these, then you're ready to move on with scripting. Okay, so let's take a look at a few of them. One of the most common ones that you're going to come across is just a display message, right? Because we often print to the terminal, right? We print to our Python shell, but we can't really rely on that. We cannot guarantee that our user has a terminal open unless we actually, like I said, use this UI module and actually force one to be opened. But what we can do is, if it's a very important message, like really important, then we can actually pop up a display message. So then it doesn't matter what they have open. If something has gone wrong or whatever, we can just, actually pop up a very obtrusive message saying, hey, I need you to do this, or don't do that. This broke and this is why. Okay. So let's try one of these. So we're gonna put up a display message. So we're gonna say who.ui dot, and then the function is called display message. Right, now there are a lot of arguments, but not all of them are that necessary. They're more there for functionality, so by default you can give it very little information and it will still work. But then if you need to customize this UI, there are a lot of options for you. Okay, primarily the only thing that we have to give it is some text. Okay, so we have to give it a message to display. Right. Now, it is a little confusing, so just note this. In this one, which I think is an older one of the first to be designed into this, it's called text. In the later ones, now it's got message is the keyword for the actual argument. Okay, I don't know why it has to be different, but just note. But because it is our first argument, often we just give it an actual piece of string. We give it a string instead of literally typing text equals. Okay, but if you do want to change the order of the keywords for some reason, then you'd feed it text equals. Okay, so we feed it some kind of string. So we just say, hey there. Okay, and that's the only one we have to give it. So if we hit enter now, it's going to pop up one of these messages, and you'll recognize this as the type of thing which sometimes Houdini opens up itself. If you click something, sometimes it will pop up its own display message. Now, there are a few things here that we often get overlooked. One is the name, okay? So the title at the top. Then there's the text over here. There is this icon. And then there's the buttons, right? As well as the close button, right? Now, all of that is available for us to actually customize, okay? You'll see over here, it gives us an option to feed it a list of buttons. So at the moment, by default, it's just got OK, but we can feed it more or different ones. We could have, even if we want only one button, but we don't want it to say OK, then we can change that. Then it has, and this is probably one of the most important things, the severity. Okay, so the severity keyword argument is asking for an instance of a severity type class. Okay, and what that does is essentially it changes this icon, but it also does allow a little bit of additional functionality in that if we use there's a certain severity type .fatal, which actually pops up the message, but when you click any button, it then actually closes Houdini. So if your user has done something so bad that it really is like breaking everything, maybe, for example, you have some kind of infinite loop, but you even have ways of making sure you don't end up in that infinite loop, except you maybe include a counter. And if somehow they do something that breaks the counter, or maybe, you know, you have something cooking and it cooks for like more than 10 hours or something like that for one single frame or whatever, if they just leave it running and it just does nothing, then you can, after a certain amount of time or whatever, you could trigger a fatal error and then it will actually close Houdini down. Okay. So I'm going to middle click on this who.severity type. Okay, hang on. Oh, I think sometimes it struggles to display stuff when this is actually displayed. So I'm going to click OK first and go past that and then middle click here, see if that opens. There we go. Okay. So this module is a list of the different types. So we have message, right, which is the default one, I believe. Yes, so just a normal message, which was that icon that we had. Then we also have, so I'm going to say severity equals, and then it's who.severity type dot, and then important message. Okay, so when we pop up an important message, it has that icon, right? So it's more like a warning. Well, okay, there is warning as well, which let's see what icon that has. So warning. Now warning has this, okay, and then there is, whoops, error, which will give that, and then there is fatal error, which will actually close Houdini. So I'm not going to do that one. You guys can try it. Don't worry, it won't break anything, but yeah, I just don't want you guys to also watch and have to like wait for me to open up another Houdini and everything. So you can try that one yourself, but that will actually close Houdini no matter what. Like even if nothing's actually wrong, you're telling it display this error and then close. Okay. So there's that. Also, just remember with our buttons, let's actually try that. Let's give it a few buttons. Okay, I'm going to clear this severity type because at the moment, if we don't need it, now we can give it a buttons equals, and then it must be a tuple, well, or a list. You can give it a list as well, and then it's just a list of strings. So my buttons. Okay, so those will now be two different buttons, my and buttons. Okay, and okay, well, I'm going to carry on with arguments just now, but I just want you to notice something, that when I had these two buttons, right, you see every time after I've run this and I clicked OK, it returned 0. Printed 0 every time. Now it printed 1, and the reason for that is because what it's actually returning is an integer, which tells us, it even tells you over here, returns the index of the button the user pressed. So when we have two buttons, this is 0, this is 1. So we know now what our user pressed, because we might pop up with a question saying, well, which one of these do you want? Okay, and no, so then we go, okay, for example, we can do that one and that, and then in here we change our message to will you take Whoops. Sorry, let me just type this. So will you take the red pill or the blue pill? Right. And now you can choose whether to live your life in the matrix or not. Okay. So you can basically ask questions, and based on what the user does, you can then, have something trigger after that. And these UI things will wait in the middle of your script. So remember, we did that whole big script for creating all the lights. Now that runs in one go. When we click apply, it just runs it all. But this, when it reaches a point of running a display message, it will actually wait. So it waits for your user to click something before it then continues. So you will then be able to use that result of which button they chose to split off into different things depending on what they clicked and what you want to do, right? Especially one of them, which you should always build in, is a cancel button. If you're going to ever open up and ask them something like, choose one of these two options, you should always actually have a third option, which is cancel. And so you can kind of force them into saying, okay, well, you got to choose one of these two things. But if when you pop it up, they realize like, oh, hang on, wait, neither of those is what I want, then they can cancel. And then you always have an exit in your script, which will just say, if this index is 2, then just return and just like exit the entire function straight away without doing anything. Okay. Or if you've already done some things, you might need some sort of cleanup script. Okay, so we've got text, buttons, and severity, and then here, okay, so there's a few things, and obviously for each one of them it's a bit different, so you really will need to kind of read through all of these, but there's default choice. So default choice is the index of the button if the user presses enter. So actually that's something that we didn't quite discuss, but if we pop this up, and now I just hit enter, okay, well, hang on, now I'm hovering over that, right? Okay, when you've got a Python shell open, I think it's a little bit harder because every time you hit enter, it just does this. So I'm going to actually just, well, we can't close that. All right, it's a little unfortunate with a Python shell open, but maybe we can, well, there's no way to pop that up without the Python shell. Okay, well, anyway, if you're running scripts like through the shelf or whatever, and your user just has this pops up and they just hit enter, you'll actually see here that this text, the word red and cancel, are in like sort of normal text, but this is actually bolded. Okay, and that means that it's sort of selected. It's like if we hit enter now, it's actually going to choose that choice instead, right? So there's default choice, and then there's also closed choice. What if I click this cross? Which one of these does it actually do when they click the cross, right? Now you can't have the cross do something, so you can't have blue and red and not have cancel, but then when you click cross, then it actually cancels. It has to be one of the choices, right? Because you have to feed it one of the indices. Okay, so it's going to be 0, 1, or 2. Okay, so when you click that now, it will just default to one of those. Okay, and in fact, I believe if it is not, yeah, if there's not one selected, because see here I'm clicking it and nothing's happening, so it may be the case that it's just another bug because the Python shell's open. But it also could be that it's, unless we say what it should be, then it actually doesn't allow the cross to do anything. So closed choice none, yeah, that might be the case. Let's try that. Okay, so we'll go back to our message over here. I'm just going to expand my Python shell a little and say close choice equals, and then let's say 2. Okay, so when we've got this open, I hit close, you see it returns 2. Okay, there we go. So that's what that one was. The enter choice, so the default choice should have an actual default choice 0, and we can move that. That just doesn't work with the Python shell open, but the closed choice must have something because it has none as a default. Then there's also some help for this. So if we actually include some help, let me just expand this. In fact, guys, I'm going to swap this to the top and bottom. So that, because I kind of want this shell to be a bit more in the middle, and whenever we're typing, we're always typing at the bottom of the shell. Okay, so I'm just going to move this a little to the side, give us a bit more space. Okay, so if we don't want a closed choice over here, but what we want is some help. So actually, let me just clear this as well and maybe make a bit of a smaller message again. And then we want to say help. Now help is none by default, but there's additional help to display below the main message. So let's say help equals, and then this is some help, right? So you see that it's actually got a message and then a little bit of help underneath. Okay. There is also, which you'll notice here, now I'm just going to come back to title just now, but in line with help, there's also details, right? Now details is a string containing extra messages that's not visible unless the user clicks show details. So that is something where we would say details equals, and this is some extra help. Okay. So now it pops up with this little thing. So we say, here's the message and here's a little bit of extra information, but then we go, oh, well, if I click this to show extra details, then we have text in here. Okay. Title is the one at the top. If none, then the title is Houdini. So that's what's been happening to us up till now, is we've got Houdini at the top here. But we could set that. So we could say title equals something. And now it'll say that at the top. So you can give it some useful sort of title at the top. And then, oh, the details label, right? So when it's expanded, it'll then actually have a label as well. And also details expanded, which is basically saying, should the details be expanded automatically or not? Okay. So it is quite self-explanatory, and there's normally pretty good help files for it. So you should read through these to actually learn what each one of these does. But we're going to run through a few of them now, just a little bit quicker than that, to show you just some of the variety that we have available to us. Okay, a lot of the arguments are the same, but some of them are just a little bit different. So display message is one that we're really going to use a lot. And it's basically allowing the user to click buttons, which allows them to make very simple choices, or sometimes to just read a message and click OK. Now, the next one that is really useful is this read input. Okay, so sometimes we need the user to actually be able to type something, not just click two things, but actually type something, right? And the first argument, which is does not have a default, is message. So we have to give it this message one, which is also just a string. Okay, so it's the text field. I don't know why they've called the one text the one message, but whatever. But then other than that, most of the arguments are the same. There's the buttons. So again, I often like to include a cancel button because I don't think it's really good to just not do that. It's got the severity type, default choice, close type. It's got all the ones that we're used to seeing, right? But one thing you should note is that it returns an integer and a string all wrapped up in a tuple. Okay, and if you read here, it should tell us exactly what that means. It returns a tuple containing an integer and a text, and the text they entered. So the integer is the index of the button they pressed, so the exact same as what happened with the display message, but then the string is the text they typed. But because it's wrapped in a tuple, we have to actually extract it. If we want to check what button they pressed, we can't just feed whatever gets returned from here. We actually have to take that tuple and then use the square brackets to access that first index, to grab the integer to know what button they pressed. And then also if we want to extract the string, then we use square brackets and the index 1 to grab that. Okay, so just note that. So other than that, we can just essentially give them, whatever message, some kind of thing to just tell them what we want them to enter. Okay, and that's going to pop up a message and ask them to essentially enter some text. So we're going to go okay then. And now you see that prints the text there and says that I clicked button 0. Okay, that was only with the only choice I had, it was to click button 0, but we could have given more buttons. Okay, right. So that's a really important one, and related to that is read multi-input. Sometimes we want them to actually input multiple things. So it's not only going to be just one, or we don't want to do one at a time as well. Like ask them one thing and then ask them another thing and then ask them another thing. That's really annoying. And in my experience of building tools, a lot of the time, the artist's primary complaint is that the tool asks them too many questions. Like, okay, obviously if the tool doesn't work, that's what they're going to complain about first. But once that is, you almost need to streamline your user interfaces. So if you can ask them all the questions in one go, or assume certain things for them, they generally prefer that. So yeah. So here we give it a message as well. So whatever message, and then we get with another thing we have to give it is the input labels, right? So that's a list of, so a sequence, which is another name for a list, right? So whenever you see sequence, it means that it must be either a tuple or a list. Okay, so a sequence of labels to appear in front of each input field. The length of the sequence determines the number of input fields. So you see, it doesn't let us specify, oh, we want to ask them for 3 inputs. It just asks for a list of labels, and it's going to assume from that we want, let's say, 3 things. So if I say 1, 2, and 3 in a list form, then I can now, when I hit enter, you see each of them has a label, and it asks me for a bunch of inputs. And what it does is it returns an integer and then a tuple of strings. Okay, and I'm sure we can guess what that is. So that is the which button they pressed, and then this tuple relates to this list over here. And of course, if we wanted to then match them up, we would first store this list in a variable, and then we'd be able to actually build maybe even a dictionary out of these as keys and these as values. And therefore, we've essentially got the user to build a dictionary without them even knowing what a dictionary is. Okay. So that's a very useful one. There's a few kind of strange things in here, like you've got this password input indices. I've never used that. I think you can specify which fields of these are password fields, which I think means it doesn't display the text as they type it or whatever, or something like that. I don't know. I've never needed to use that. Initial contents. So this allows you to say if there should maybe already be something in that field. Okay. So instead of these being empty, you could actually specify through a list. You could say initial contents equals, but now you need to give it sort of a sequence that is the same length as the length of the values over here, because otherwise it's not going to know what to do. Including if you want one of them to be empty, then you need to at least give it an empty string, and then say something, and then maybe another empty one. Okay, and now at least there will be something in the middle one, right? Okay. Title as well. These are all ones that we've come across before, so that should be easy enough to understand. Okay. Should we test what this password input indices does? I've never used that before. Okay, let's try this. So we go password input indices equals, and then it wants a string, and the string is a sequence of indices of which input fields are password fields. So it's okay, so let's say we just want number 1 to be fields whose index is not in the sequence will not be password fields. That's interesting. Or maybe it has to specifically be a list. Okay, yeah, there we are. Okay, so it just must be a list, so we have to include a comma. I'll type here. Ah, yes, yeah, you see, that's it. So if you're wanting somebody to, let's say, maybe you've got a very secure kind of pipeline, and you could actually have your scripts locked off where they need to first enter a password before something will do something. Maybe you're going to alter some file or whatever, and so you want them to actually have password access. Then you'd actually give an input field and say, okay, well, I want that to be a password, which means as I type it, it doesn't display the text. That's funny. But I guess if you've got that type of pipeline, then okay. All right, so that's the read multi-input. Now, select file. This, of course, is going to be a very useful one. Sometimes you need your users to select files on disk. Okay, so who.ui.select file, and what's weird about this one is that it actually has all defaults, so we can just run this straight as like that, and already it's then going to pop open a little file thing like asking us to explore and point to a particular file on disk. Now, what we can do is we can feed it a start directory, okay? So that's then going to be an actual string, which is a path to the start directory where it should start from. And then again, it's got title collapse sequences. So that's if you know, whenever you display this, you say here show sequences as one entry. Well, that will be ticked on by default if that is on. Then file type, that is the this here, so sort of which files, like how to filter for those particular files. Oh, sorry, wait, that's pattern. File type, this is specifying what it will accept, okay? And that is another module over here. So who.fileType module will then say, you can say accept any, or accept only geometry files, or whatever. There's a whole list, okay, including, which is one we're going to use later on, is directory. So if you're wanting them to select an actual location, not a file itself, but just a folder, so a directory, then we can do it that way, all right? But then the pattern is just how that filter list by default, okay? Then we've got a default value. Multiple select is false, so that will be that can they select multiple files, or are they forced to select only one? So that is this one. The image chooser, whether a dialog shows image thumbnails or not, so that's only if you're asking them to select an image. Then it would be nice and useful for them if you said true in this field. And then chooser mode. So you're choosing whether it's a read and write, or well, we can click on here. It's a separate module. So there's read, write, and then read and write. Okay. All right. So that's pretty self-explanatory. Selecting a file. Okay. Now select from list and select from tree are the next two we're going to talk about. So here for both of them, we give them a list of choices. Okay. Now these choices are defined by a sequence of strings. Okay. In both cases. And what you're essentially doing is asking them to choose. Now these strings can be anything. It can be arbitrary, like they could relate to names of nodes in your scene. It could be a bunch of choices. It could really be anything. You determine it because it's just a string. But and then it's got its normal things like title and a message to go along with it and whatever, okay? But the main difference between these two is the first one will take that sequence of strings and just list them, okay? And then get them to choose either one of them. If exclusive is true, then it will say select only one of them, or false will allow them to multi-select. So for example, we say who.ui dot, and then it's select from list. And then we give it a sequence of strings. So let's just, again, we'll just type 1, 2, and 3, right? Now what that's going to do is pop up this and say make selection, right? Although we can specify what that says. And then it has these, and we can we can select 2 at a time. Doesn't matter, let us select all of them or none of them and say accept. Okay, and then it will return a list of whichever ones we selected. So we had the first index and the third index selected. Okay, so that does that. Now, obviously, if we tell it that exclusive equals true, then it will specify that we must only select one. Okay. Now, select from tree works almost the same, except that it allows us to give a path. So separated by slashes, we can actually specify sort of paths. So it uses a / as a path separator. So for example, let's say before the word 1 over here, I put number /1, and then here I say number /2, but then I don't do it for the third one. Okay. Then what's going to happen is it's going to, I need to just change it here from select from list to select from tree. So what's going to happen is going to pop up, look, very similar dialogue, except that it actually now has sort of a hierarchy where it allows us to specify this kind of, list of, okay, so I've got 1 or 2 or, 3 there, okay. Now I think it is possible to do this where included in that list, if we include the number itself, then it will allow us to select that number and select the things inside of it. So that depends on whether that's what you actually want. Okay. So for example, I don't think that worked properly, because if we've got that one selected, and say accept, it only returned the word number and 3. That's a bit of a bug, because we definitely selected the other one. Let's select just that. Well, that's a bug. So yeah, it's a bit odd. Select those two. Yeah, okay. Oh well, it's a shame. But anyway, normally you don't need to do that where you select with a number. You normally select the things within the hierarchy. And your hierarchy can be larger than that. It could also have, it could go deeper. So you can have something there as well. And then inside of that, then you have that and so on. Okay. All right. And then it has similar things as well, title and message and everything. And also choices, picked. This is a sequence of strings containing the items that should be initially selected as well. So if you want some of them to already be selected, then you just feed it that same string. Okay. Now you'll see that the select from list returns a list of indices, but the select from tree, because of the hierarchy nature of it, it doesn't really know how to represent that other than actually returning the whole path to whatever they had selected. Right. But you can reverse engineer that to get the index from this list if you wanted to, because number/1 exists in this list, and so you can use the index function to find out which index that is within this list. Okay. Right, so that's select from list and select from tree. Now we can also select node, which is a very obvious one. Say who.ui.select select node. And it just forces us to select a node from our scene. We can say relative to a particular node, and so it will then return the path in a relative way. And we can have an initial node selected, and then we can also filter by type, which is its own module over here with a list of different types. So we can specify that. There's also select multiple nodes, right? So it's the same behavior as the select node, except that if the user holds control, then they can do it. It's weird that it's not just one function, and like these other ones where it's got the exclusive as an argument. Instead, it's two different functions. But okay, so if you want them to be able to select multiple nodes, then you just run this one. And then there's also, I'll come back to these ones, but there's also select parameters. So there's select parm, and there's also select parm tuple. Okay. And with this, but it also, in this, it has that argument where it allows multi-select. So you could select multiple parameters, unlike with the nodes. But this is whether you're selecting parameters. So are you selecting tx, ty, and tz separately, right? So something like who.ui.select parm, okay, is then asking us to select a parameter from our scene. Okay, we have nothing in our scene, so let's drop down a geometry node and then rerun that function. So under obj level, it's going to allow us to navigate down to a parameter level. Okay, but you'll see here under wireframe color, it's got RGB, and it will not allow me to select color. It's just going to expand it and ask me to select one of these. However, if I say select parm tuple, then it will be a little bit different and will actually allow me to select that color. Okay, so I can select color as a parm tuple instead. Right, and then what it returns is then a list of a tuple of strings of the path to that parameter, which we could use that to go and then select those parm tuples and return the actual parm tuple instance. Okay. Then some of the other useful ones, so select attribute, that could be a really good one. So who.ui.select attrib. Okay. And I don't know if I actually missed this one or whether whether it is quite new, but I've actually never noticed it before until planning this. So that was actually quite cool. So there's a good chance that they've actually only added it recently. But let's say we go and drop down a grid and put a color node down or something like that. So it's got some parameters, and then we specify here, and then it's asking us to navigate down to the actual on the color node. itself by the point in time. So, you know, at this node, it will have these attributes. Okay. Right. And then we can kind of go deeper in and navigate down to the attributes. So we've got CD and we've got P. So these are point attributes, and we can look at others as well. All right. So for example, we've just got P over there. Cool. So for every node at that point, if you middle clicked and looked at what attributes are there, that's what it would be. Okay. So the select attribute, and then also select color can be useful as well. So we say, because sometimes you want to, I mean, let's say you want to build a script that lets your user choose the color for a node or something. Then you just go who.ui.select color. And then it's going to pop up an actual color dialog and let you go and specify a very specific color, and then you say okay, and then it's just going to return a who.color of that. But your script could then take it a bit further, so you could have it literally change the color of a node by you know, we could like literally build that really quickly. I mean, you just go import who, and then for n in who.selected nodes, oops, and then you say n, okay, well, we need to first ask the question of the user, so who.ui.select color, okay, and what they choose is going to return a vector, like a who.color type, so we say col equals, and then we would go n.set color to be col. Okay, and then we just have that. We click apply, it asks us which color. We go and specify whatever really bizarre random color we want. We click OK, and it sets the node to that color. Okay, so really easy. But you see that where we're just basically asking the user for some kind of input, which then specifies how the script works. Okay, so that's mostly it. I'm not really going to go through all the rest of this. You can, this is a cool one actually, is the set the status message if you want to. Sometimes you can have it that during your script, while it's loading some very heavy things, maybe you're looping, like in our lights script, as we loop over each node, maybe you want to actually print to the status message at the bottom over here. So we can say who.set status message. Hey guys. Okay, and then when we do that, oh, hang on. Is it set? Yeah. Who.ui. Sorry. Who.ui.set status message. Okay, and then it prints it all the way down over here in this tiny little thing. So you know when you're like cooking or like running a function or whatever, it prints it to here. That's what this is doing. Okay, so inside a loop, you know, you could say like, you know, for I in range 10. Then you'd like do something, you know, like print I, but then you'd also do who.ui.display not display message, set status message, and then you'd set it to be equal to I or something like that. Okay, and then you run that. Oh, I guess it wants a string. So see, this is actually why typing in the Python shell is a little bit annoying when you have to run a loop, because now you have to go back and set all of those lines again for it to run them. But anyway, it wants a string. Man, there we go. So let's convert that to a string. Okay. Oh no. Okay. Oh, sorry, it's str. I always forget that because of from Vex, then I'm used to putting a string. Okay, so str like that, and so it prints here, but then it also changes the status message down here to that same thing. Normally, what you'll do is actually calculate a percentage. So let's say you're running through like 1,000 nodes, then you'll actually make sure that every time if you do that enumerate, and then you divide by the length of the list that you're running through, then you can calculate the percentage of its progress, and then you can actually print the status message of the progress. Okay, now obviously it replaces itself, so you didn't see any of the other ones, you just saw 9 because it's so quick. But if you're running a much heavier function, like with the lights, it was really slow. Well, now we could actually print percentages to that, and we could say, okay, well, we're 50%, we're 80%. And if you've got a really heavy function, it's really good to do that, because think about it, you as a user, I mean, if you click something in like Windows or whatever, you click it and it doesn't have any status bar. You don't know if the thing's frozen, if it's doing anything, is it broken, did it work at all? And then suddenly something changes. That's really annoying. So you want to sort of have some kind of feedback going, yeah, don't worry, I'm doing it. It's just heavy. I'm halfway done. Just relax. So printing to that status bar can be very useful if you need to. Other than that, there's some event callbacks and things like that. You can force sort of cook and update your viewport, or change this over here so that it cooks manually or automatically. And there's your clipboard. You can actually copy things to clipboard or get stuff from the clipboard that people have copied. So if they've actually copied some text, you could use that in your script for some reason. You can write out this actual Python shell you can write the history out to a file if you want. And then there's some PyQt stuff in here as well. So some really interesting and useful things in this list, but primarily you may need this panes section, but the main thing that we're going to use this module for is the scripted UI. Okay, and you will use this all the time, because really you need your users to be able to interact with the tools. Okay, so have fun playing with this one, guys, and then I'll see you in the next lesson, where we're going to be talking about the render scripts that run, and we can run Python render scripts, so before frame or after render or whatever. All right, so look forward to seeing you guys there.